I never thought that at 37 something so ordinary could knock my life slightly off balance. Nothing dramatic happened, no scandal, no big confession, just a small change in routine. And suddenly I started noticing things I hadn't allowed myself to notice in years. My name is Jennifer. I'm married to Carlos, and on paper my life is stable. We live in a large house in Florianopolis, the kind of place people call paradise. Carlos works as a truck driver, which means he earns well, and he's rarely home. I'm used to it. I tell myself I'm used to it. But some nights, when the house goes quiet and the air feels too still, loneliness doesn't arrive like sadness. It arrives like emptiness, like you're standing in the middle of your own life and realizing you haven't been touched emotionally in a long time. That's when my sister called and asked me for a favor. Her son, Christian, my nephew, needed to spend a month in the city to prepare for an army exam. She wanted him somewhere calm, somewhere safe, somewhere he could focus. Carlos agreed immediately. Of course he did. He's generous like that. And I agreed too, because it was family, because it was the right thing to do. I didn't expect anything from it. I thought it would be simple. But the day Christian arrived, I realized time had done what time always does. He wasn't a boy anymore. At 23, he carried himself differently. Taller, broader, quiet confidence. The kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but somehow pulls it anyway. I remember smiling and joking, the way people do when they don't want to sit in the silence of surprise. "Look at you," I said. "You're strong. You must be popular with girls." He laughed, casual, almost innocent. He told me he was too focused on training and studying to think about girls. And that should have been the end of it. A normal conversation, a normal visit. Except I noticed something in myself shift, very faintly, like a compass turning without permission. The first few days were normal. We ate together, talked about his exam, his routine, his goals. Everything stayed polite, respectful, exactly how it should be. But sometimes, between sentences, there would be a pause that felt heavier than it deserved to be. A quiet moment where neither of us rushed to fill the space. And I couldn't tell if it was awkwardness or awareness. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch. Nothing special, just plates, water running, the clink of glass. He stood beside me with that calm, focused energy, and I became strangely aware of my own body, of the way I moved, of the fact that I was being seen. Not in a dirty way, not in a deliberate way, just seen. And what disturbed me wasn't him. It was how quickly my mind tried to explain it. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was simply adjusting to the fact that he wasn't a child anymore, that this was what happens when people grow up and the roles feel unfamiliar for a moment. But later that night, in my room, the quiet came back. And with it, a thought that wouldn't leave me alone. Why did his presence make the house feel different? Nothing had happened. No line had been crossed. No word had been spoken that shouldn't have been spoken. And yet I felt like something inside me had been stirred. Something I'd packed away years ago because there was no space for it in my life anymore. By the end of that first week, I wasn't afraid of Christian. I was afraid of what his presence was revealing about me. And I didn't know yet if that was something I needed to shut down immediately or finally understand. The day settled into a pattern that looked ordinary from the outside, but felt charged beneath the surface. Mornings began early, sunlight spilling across the kitchen tiles while the house breathed awake. Christian trained before dawn, returning flushed and quiet, his focus wrapped tightly around routines and discipline. I kept myself busy, laundry, calls, the steady rituals that usually anchored me. Yet every shared space felt different now, as if the walls were listening. We spoke easily, carefully. Small talk stretched longer than it needed to. A question about his exam drifted into a story about discipline, which slipped into something more personal, why structure mattered, why stillness felt dangerous. He spoke about pressure, about the fear of not becoming what he'd promised himself he would be. I listened more than I answered, When he finished, there was always a pause, heavy and unresolved, like a sentence left unfinished on purpose. I noticed the pauses first, the way he lingered in doorways, as if deciding whether to leave or stay. The way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't watching, not with hunger, but with curiosity, searching for permission he never asked for. I felt it too, the pull of being seen without explanation. It frightened me how comforting that felt. One afternoon, rain pressed against the windows and turned the house inward. We stood at the sink together, the hum of water filling the space between us. Our hands brushed, barely, accidentally, and both of us froze. Nothing happened. That was the point. The restraint sat there, visible, undeniable. He stepped back first. I pretended to be busy. The air took longer to clear. At night, sleep refused me. The house creaked the way old houses do, each sound exaggerated by silence. I replayed the day in fragments, his careful distance, the softness in his voice when he spoke about the future, the way he thanked me for listening as if it were a gift. I realized then how rare it was for anyone to listen without asking for something back. The next morning he apologized for nothing in particular. I smiled and said there was nothing to apologize for. We both knew that wasn't true, but saying it out loud would have changed everything. Instead, we chose the safer path, the one that kept us hovering at the edge. We took a walk in the late afternoon, the neighborhood quiet, the sky low and gray. He talked about leaving soon, about the relief and the loss wrapped together in that thought. I told him leaving was part of becoming, even when it hurt. He nodded, then stopped walking altogether. For a moment, I thought he might say something irreversible. He didn't. He thanked me again for believing in him, for making the house feel steady when his mind wasn't. When we returned, the house felt smaller, as if it had absorbed the weight of everything we hadn't said. I noticed how carefully he kept his distance now, how intention had replaced instinct. It was a kind of respect that made my chest tighten. Desire thrives on permission, but restraint builds something else, something quieter and harder to ignore. That evening, I sat alone with my thoughts and understood the truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't about temptation, it was about recognition. About two people standing too close to a mirror and seeing parts of themselves they'd neglected. The line remained uncrossed, bright and deliberate, and somehow that made the pull stronger, not because it promised more, but because it demanded restraint. The house went quiet again. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. I stayed where I was, breathing through the tension, knowing that the hardest part wasn't stopping. It was choosing to keep stopping, again and again, while the feeling refused to fade. By the final days of his stay, the tension had shifted into something quieter but heavier, like a storm that never breaks yet changes the pressure in the air. We moved around each other with practiced care, aware of every step, every pause. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had. The house held the memory of restraint, and restraint, I learned, leaves deeper marks than impulse ever could. Christian began packing early, folding his clothes with the same precision he used in training. I watched from the doorway, unsure why my chest felt tight. He spoke about the exam results, about plans and contingencies, about the road ahead. He spoke like someone anchoring himself to facts because feelings were less manageable. I listened, nodding, offering encouragement that sounded steady even when my thoughts weren't. Later that afternoon, we shared one last meal alone. The conversation was light by design. We laughed at small things, at memories from the month that felt safer when framed as routine. But beneath it all was an unspoken understanding. This was a closing chapter, not an ending but a deliberate stop, the kind you choose when you know continuing would cost more than it gives. When he stood to leave the table, he hesitated, then sat back down. He looked at me, not searching, not asking, just honest. He thanked me for the space, for the calm, for not making things complicated when they easily could have been. I realized then that restraint had been a shared decision, not a burden placed on one side. That knowledge eased something in me. The evening stretched long and reflective. We sat in the living room with the lights low, the quiet companionable. He spoke about the kind of man he wanted to become, measured, focused, capable of choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. I told him that becoming often looks like learning when not to reach, even when you can. Our eyes met, and in that moment the meaning was clear without being named. When it was time to say goodnight, he stopped at the doorway. He didn't step closer. He didn't touch my hand. He simply said my name with gratitude and resolve, like a promise to himself. I answered the same way. The door closed softly. The house exhaled. The next morning came early. The sky was pale, the air cool. We stood at the entrance with bags packed and words carefully chosen. He hugged me, brief, respectful, grounded, no lingering, no confusion. He thanked me again, then turned toward the future he had been preparing for all along. After he left, the house felt different, not emptier, but clearer. I walked through the rooms and noticed what remained, the quiet confidence of choosing restraint, the clarity that comes from naming a feeling without feeding it. Desire had shown up, unmistakable and human, and we had met it with intention instead of impulse. That, I realized, was the real turning point. Not the temptation, but the decision. Not what could have happened, but what didn't, and why. Some connections are meant to be felt and then released, leaving behind a sharper sense of self. As the day settled, I understood the lesson the month had taught me. Fulfillment doesn't always come from crossing lines. Sometimes it comes from seeing them clearly, standing at the edge and choosing to step back, carrying the insight forward, lighter and more grounded than before.